Filipinos cling to their strong identities. When you become aware of this issue, however, you have two options. You can decide to completely cut all ties with the Philippines in order to cling to a culture that gives you a sense of superiority and pride, or you can analyze why Filipino culture is inferior and attempt to come up with solutions. When you ask the typical Filipino about our national heroes, it's likely that they would largely name someone who fought against a colonial power like Spain or America. Very rarely you will hear someone name someone who is from our current time period or anywhere nearby. I feel like we had a unique identity once, a Hispano-Asian identity. The same Hispano-Asian identity proudly worn by the upper echelons of society who we look up to, and then once that identity evaporated, we got more and more confused about who we really are. And through that confusion comes the loss of sense of belonging to the country, and through that loss of belonging, we get people who don't really care about making our country better. But here's the thing, in the grand scheme of things, being a true Filipino doesn't matter. I can just tell you, oh, you're Filipino, dude. Being a true Filipino truly doesn't signify anything because it has no real meaning. If you're not a true Filipino, so what? People born in the Philippines who relocate to other nations are sometimes fine despite being cut off from their motherland. National identity is actually meaningless, and to be completely honest, I'm really concerned if, as an observer, are currently attaching our sense of self to it. Our nationalities just identify the nation in which we occurred to be born at the end of the day. I find it both hilarious and terrifying that we're supposed to take pleasure in our language or anything like that. I didn't choose to be born here, and I didn't assist in the development of the customs, cultures, and language that exists now. Why should I be proud? I hope you understand that what I'm trying to say is nationality shouldn't matter to you, or at least not enough to make you question your existence if there is a breach in your facade. Don't get me wrong. As I said earlier, you can appreciate the rich cultural diversity that the Philippines has. Again, culture to me is fascinating. Despite any horrible experiences in this country, you can even feel proud in it. But it isn't and shouldn't be at all and all of your sense of self. And if the whole nationality isn't everything argument doesn't strike your fantasy, here's a simpler one. When they say, I don't think you can be called a true SpongeBob fan if you haven't watched season 1 to 4. It's very similar to, I don't think you can be called Filipino if you don't watch Filipino media. Do you see the resemblance? The concept of the real Filipino is nothing more than gatekeeping. Just like there is no point in debating whether or not I am a true SpongeBob fan, there is no point in debating whether or not you're a true Filipino. Ultimately, whether or not I watch the prior seasons, I enjoy SpongeBob. In the end, the only thing that matters is that you and I are Filipinos.
The subject of sexuality is quite complicated. Some people have a romantic attraction to a babe but a sexual attraction to the lackey. In either case, a youngster has no say in the matter. In this country, there is still a serious problem with LGBT stereotypes, and those who identify as LGBT people are partially to blame for this. When someone uses the word gay in our nation, Pinoys immediately picture effeminate males acting femininely who may or may not be wearing female apparel and who speak in a way that mimics girls, perhaps macho men in gyms. In a manner comparable to tomboys as well, short hair, masculine attire, etc., gay people are frequently featured as comic relief in films and television shows, whether they are the main character or a supporting one. Common roles include helper, beautician, and talent manager. Barbados, jeepney drivers, and security personnel are all homosexuals. Because of this, when young people watch this, they remember that this is the way things are in the real world. They have a point in that sense because this is also what occurs in reality. The shows and social media are partially to blame for the spread of these misconceptions. Homosexual people joyfully engage in Miss Gay competitions that are still held in workplaces, schools, and barangays under the assumption that sexual orientation is the same as gender identity. People who are not straight are perceived as being of lower status and a joke since even those who are not gay dress up and behave in a stereotyped ways, simply comedic. They are unaware that society, employers, and even their own family members, particularly those who have closed minds, frequently discriminate against these people. Being homosexual is different from being transgender and transsexual, and illiterate people frequently confuse the two. No one is being empowered by it. People are being hurt, especially young people who believe that acting and dressing a specific way is required according to your sexual inclination and gender identity.
We are of the opinion that instead of rejecting democracy as a whole, we could improve the specific form of democracy by doing or having the following. First is automatic voter registration. Instead of having to declare yourself a voter, the government should assume that people are voters upon reaching adulthood, or at the very minimum, voter registration should be offered year round, rather than at specific times. Second is the lifting of disenfranchisement provisions in the law. And then the third is preferential voting or instant runoff voting. This is a big one. We need to find a way to create conditions by which elected officials actually have to win majorities rather than the slim pluralities that they do right now. It's not really accurate to say that the Filipino electorate placed Duterte into power, because according to all accounts, neither Duterte nor any of his contemporary predecessors ever received a majority of the vote. The issue is not that we live in a democracy, but rather that the system is not sufficiently democratic. Overall, we believe that democracy is functioning, nevertheless, it is not currently in the ideal condition. We believe that the idea of democracy, that all people are created equal, cannot be realized simply by granting each person one vote. Its goal It's a goal that's constantly pursued by enacting legislation to protect democracy and by seeking for new ways to address inequality. It's vital to recognize that the two-party system in America is not in any way established into its laws or its constitution. The two-party system is what happens when you take our existing kind of non-majoritarian democracy and expand it out across a century and more of continuing existence. When the electoral process makes it so that a third party acts as a spoiler and increases the likelihood that the worst candidate will win, for instance, voting for Grace Poe instead of Mar Rojas only increases the likelihood that Duterte will win. It encourages parties to coalesce into two parties only. In theory, this does cause majorities, but at the cost of choice. Because if we talk about 2016 election between Rojas and Duterte, or perhaps between Trump and Clinton, it represents such a narrow view of politics that it can cause people to become discouraged from participating because they feel like their preferences are never being represented by either party. Right now, the Philippines is in a terrible spot. But because we have a democracy, there is still a chance to right our mistakes and vote for people that would protect and improve our democracy. With every other kind of government, that power diminishes and empowers the minority.